Somalian pirates robbed us for $1 billion.
According to a new bombshell report from the New York Times, Somalian migrants in Minnesota have defrauded nearly $1 billion in taxpayer-funded benefits under Democrat Governor Walz's leadership.
This was the biggest COVID scam in American history.
A nonprofit and its affiliates with these Somali migrants claim to have fed tens of thousands of American children during the pandemic. They were reimbursed for those meals by taxpayers. However, federal prosecutors found that almost all of those meals were never even delivered to hungry children. In fact, those organizations' leaders spent the money on houses, luxury cars, and real estate in Turkey and Kenya.
Getting scammed isn't generous, it's stupid. And if Somalians are behind it, we're going to blame them.
We do not blame the lawlessness of an individual on a whole community.
That's not what Elon said about white Republicans. She thinks we should all be locked up over J6. We're not giving Somalis a pass just because they're black. We're just sick of getting ripped off.
Do you stand by that claim of calling Tim Walz?
Yeah, I think there's something wrong with him. Absolutely, sure.
All right, listen up. What you're about to hear is one of the most unbelievable scandals in modern American politics, and somehow the people responsible are still pretending it never happened. Today, I'm breaking down how nearly $1 billion in taxpayer money vanished under Governor Tim Walz's watch, and how a powerful political machine tried to silence anyone who dared expose it. Let's get into it.
Somalian pirates robbed us for $1 billion.
According to a new bombshell report from the New York Times, Somalian migrants in Minnesota have defrauded nearly $1 billion in taxpayer-funded benefits under Democrat Governor Walz's leadership.
This was the biggest COVID scam in American history.
A nonprofit and its affiliates with these Somali migrants claim to have fed tens of thousands of American children during the pandemic. They were reimbursed for those meals by taxpayers. However, federal prosecutors found that almost all of those meals were never even delivered to hungry children. In fact, those organizations' leaders spent the money on houses, luxury cars, and real estate in Turkey and Kenya.
Somalis were stealing your money right under Tim Walz's nose. And this didn't come out of the blue. There were red flags and whistleblowers. But the Somalis played the race card. They said they'd sue and go to the press if the funds didn't come through. This was right after the Floyd riots. Walz didn't want the racial heat. Minnesota Democrats also didn't want to tick off one of their most powerful voting blocs. We've been importing thousands of Somalians into Minnesota for decades, and they've been feasting on Minnesota's welfare programs. Now they're political heavyweights. So when government whistleblowers told Walz what was happening, he tried shutting them up, they say. Tim Walz systematically retaliated against whistleblowers using monitoring, threats, repression, and did his best to discredit fraud reports. So Walz had a COVID snitch line, but when someone snitched on the Somalis, he hung up the phone. This should have been the biggest story of the election. Kamala's VP pick let his state get fleeced. Walz even gave one of the Somalis a trophy before she was arrested, the Outstanding Refugee Award. That's enough to sink a campaign, but Kamala still picked him. Government whistleblowers say they warned Kamala and the DNC about it also. Now, Tim Walz says, don't blame the Somalis.
It's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals.
Getting scammed isn't generous. It's stupid. And if Somalians are behind it, we're going to blame them.
We do not blame the lawlessness of an individual on a whole community.
That's not what Elon said about white Republicans. She thinks we should all be locked up over J6. We're not giving Somalis a pass just because they're black. We're just sick of getting ripped off.
Do you stand by that claim of calling Tim Walz?
Yeah, I think there's something wrong with him. Absolutely, sure.
Christopher Rufo is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. How bad was this scam?
Well, it's even worse than the current reports indicate. It's not just a single billion, but sources in Minnesota tell me it's multiple billions of dollars that have been stolen by Somali migrants, predominantly in Minneapolis. They were doing things like faking autism diagnoses, faking autism treatment plans, opening up fraudulent autism centers, and then bilking hundreds of millions of dollars from taxpayers. This is the biggest systematic fraud scandal, and it's not just a few isolated individuals. I think we're looking at hundreds of Somali families and really widespread recognition within the Somali community.
And so this fraud was raised multiple times by multiple people, and the Democrats in charge in Walz's office did nothing?
That's right. Bits and pieces of the story have been leaking out for almost 10 years now. And Minnesota political leaders say that the Somali community is so powerful. It uses intimidation. It threatens people with accusations of racism, that at one point the Minnesota state government had shut down some of this funding. But upon threats from the community, they reopened it without any investigation, any penalty. And this is what happens when you get Minnesota nice, that mixes with a Somali community that seems to think it could commit fraud with impunity. This is not a good mix, and it just shows you that, look, not all cultures are equal, and some cultural systems are fundamentally incompatible. That's why you have weak leaders like Tim Walz, who, might have been able to get by in the 1970s, is being systematically exploited today.
And you broke this story before the New York Times, so we have to give Chris Rufo credit. I mean, you have been breaking a lot of stories before the Times. It seems like a pattern. So keep up the great work, Chris.
So,
we really
according
appreciate
to multiple federal investigations, including prosecutors and major reporting, this massive fraud centered on Somali-run nonprofits in Minnesota claiming they were feeding tens of thousands of kids during the pandemic. Only problem: the meals never existed. Federal authorities describe it as industrial-scale fraud. Instead of feeding families, the money allegedly went to luxury houses, high-end cars, foreign properties, and lavish lifestyles most Americans can't even imagine. The scale? Prosecutors put losses at over $240 million from the Feeding Our Future nonprofit alone, the nation's largest known COVID-era fraud scheme. Broader probes into related programs, like housing stabilization and autism services, suggest the total could climb into the billions in stolen taxpayer funds since around 2018. And the craziest part? This was happening right under Governor Tim Walz's nose. Whistleblowers raised red flags early. They begged the state to investigate, but every time someone spoke up, they faced threats, accusations of racism, and heavy political pressure to shut up. Right after the George Floyd riots, no one in power wanted another firestorm. The Somali political bloc in Minnesota knew it, so instead of digging in, the state backed off. Funds kept flowing, and the scam ballooned. State workers now say Walz didn't just ignore the warnings. Some allege retaliation against those trying to stop the fraud, monitoring them, discrediting them, shutting down reports. They even had a hotline for COVID fraud tips, but when someone called about this, suddenly the phone went dead. Meanwhile, Walz was handing out awards, literally giving a trophy to one of the people later arrested in the scandal. Then there's Christopher Rufo and others reporting the real number could be multiple billions, not just one. Fraudulent autism diagnoses, fake treatment centers, false billing schemes running for nearly a decade. Rufo says hundreds of families were involved, and Minnesota leaders were too intimidated by the Somali community's political influence to shut anything down. This wasn't a tiny crack in the system. This was a total collapse of oversight. Minnesota officials admit they reopened funding pipelines because of threats, not evidence, not audits, not investigations, just raw political pressure. Weak leadership mixed with a community that knew how to weaponize accusations of racism. And suddenly you've got one of the largest COVID fraud cases in the country. And yet somehow Walz still got picked for the national ticket. This wasn't generosity. This wasn't compassion. This was billions of stolen dollars, buried whistleblowers, and a political machine determined to protect itself, no matter the cost to taxpayers. The people responsible want you to believe it's no big deal. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because this story deserves every ounce of attention it can get. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a like, and turn on notifications. More truth is coming.